We are here with Dan Levy from Aecom. He is the Vice President and National Director of Algae Operations for Aecom. So welcome to the Bloom Room, Dan.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. It's a pleasure.
Great to have you here. So first off, who is Aecom and what do you do or not do?
Well, we're pretty much the largest infrastructure company globally. So we're involved with every major infrastructure policy. Our main focus as a company is to deliver a better world. And that's really where my team and my mission ends up coming into play on how we developed. And we're the first company of our size to really lean into this global crisis of what do you do with harmful algal blooms?
Yeah, so how did Aecom get involved with algae blooms?
At the time, 2016, Florida was hit with a algae crisis, and it made all sorts of news. And at that time, Governor Scott was in the paper, and we were shutting down beaches. This was a July 4th event, and it was pretty tragic here in the state of Florida. At that time, my youngest son, who was also a geologist, was an intern at our company in Tallahassee. And he reached out and said, hey, we need to take a look at this. Why aren't we doing something? So as an intern, we always give them the research projects and everything else. I said, well, why don't you go out and find out who's doing this? Maybe there's an acquisition. Maybe we can lean into it. And after about a couple of weeks, he said, well, I've only found a single firm. They're called Bloom.
That's us.
And there's a guy named Ryan Hunt. You should reach out to him. And the rest has been history.
So I think we've become, and certainly are, algae advocates, algae champions, algae lovers. But not everybody is that way. From your perspective and from the Aecom's perspective, and even from your customers, your clients, the government agencies, how do they see algae blooms?
Today, because of global warming and climate change and the population growth, we are seeing more and more harmful algal blooms throughout the country. This isn't a Florida issue or a California issue or China issue. This is every country, every state, and they're lasting longer and they're becoming more toxic. But it just doesn't resonate. But we have to be able to provide that path forward. And that's really what our job is here as technical leaders, is to say, hey, we know we have an issue. How do we solve it? Let's bring the brain power in, work with all the agencies. And that's what an Aecom company does. We look at these global problems, bring in the right experts, and find a solution to move forward with.
So as you've been doing that over the past several years, you've looked at a variety of different solutions to the algae problem. What makes your current approach with algae harvesting unique, and how is it differentiated from some of the other approaches that other organizations are taking to solve this?
Well, it's the only one that offers a permanent solution forward. It physically exports the nutrients, but people want to see results quickly, immediately. And at times we need to have those. But when you look at states like Utah and California, where they need clean, fresh drinking water, they're limited. When they get harmful algal blooms in their drinking water, they're using, copper sulfate light, or as Brian would probably call it, poison light. You're putting poison in the water, but not a lot of poison. But that can't be a permanent solution. Florida can't afford to have, harmful algal blooms. People don't come to our state for a strip mall, right? They're not coming here. They're coming here because of our water. And if our water has toxic blooms in them, we have a major problem. So we've been doing it here in the state of Florida to really take this harmful algal bloom problem to the point that we can harvest the algae out of the water and transform that into sustainable aviation fuel. And the third one that we're working on now is transforming it into a biofertilizer. So, we're hoping by the end of 2022, there's now not just the biofoam, but we also have other uses that algae could play in, because as we look at this as a global issue, and even though everybody wears shoes, I think we're going to have more algae than you can use in your shoe and foam manufacturing. So we have to find another place to get a beneficial use out of the algae. Hence, the fuel and the fertilizer came into play.
So the algae fuels, there's algae fertilizers, there's the algae materials with Bloom. How do you go about communicating the benefits of algae to the general public?
We have been able to hold public meetings at our research events, bringing them out there. And once the general public sees the operation firsthand and can kick the tires firsthand, then it becomes, wait a minute, if you physically take the nutrients out, the problem's solved, because by taking the nutrients out, we're returning back clarified water. And we're saying, we're not stopping there, guys. See all this gunk that we took out? Well, this is actually valuable. It's biomass. It has algae cells in it, but it has all your key nutrients in it, and it has an enormous amount of carbon.
So what has been the reception like with the government agencies, with your work with environmental restoration projects?
Absolutely phenomenal. We've worked with key regulatory agencies, from the EPA to the federal government, Army Corps of Engineers, all the way down to the local levels at New York State, Florida, et cetera, that absolutely have understood this, have come out firsthand, grabbed samples, and we're moving forward now with some great projects.
Where do you see the most interest with these remediation projects?
Well, the biggest interest is on taking the algae scum out of the water. But that's not really the biggest bang for the buck. The biggest bang for the buck is to get ahead of this before the bloom happens. So we're essentially going to go in there and remove nutrients while the water still looks good. So this is where a lot of people misinterpret it, saying, hey, the water always looks this color brown. I think it's fine. It's like, yeah, but the amount of nutrients you have in this waterway will create a harmful algal bloom. Amon was banking on it, because when this gets a little hotter, a little bit more sun, it's going to bloom. And when that happens, the cat's out of the bag, and it'll be too hard for us to capture it. So we need to be ahead of the game, but it's hard to get that support because not every lake has a harmful algal bloom every year at exactly the same time. So it varies with the season, because it's a natural phenomenon that happens here. Put a lot of food and water into a circumstance and add sun to it, it's going to get an algae bloom.
So how do you pick and choose where Aecom harvests algae from?
Well, we've been talking with the state agencies and regulators and trying to focus on some of the worst water bodies in each state and say, let's tackle these water bodies first. Let's give us the worst problem and let's tackle that. And once we can solve the worst problem, then we can start looking at other ways of implementing this.
So if you could leave the guests, the listeners, with just one tidbit of knowledge that they could use at their next cocktail party to impress their friends and family about algae, what would you tell them?
Well, there's a lot, so I'll try to come up with one of my favorites, is that we can take algae to fuel and create a sustainable aviation fuel. Just like you were doing with your shoes, saying, hey, these shoes, we're walking on shoes made from algae. I want to have those shoes walking onto a plane, saying this plane is being flown by algae. And that, I think, would be the icing on the cake, especially when you're sitting on one of a Bloom foam seats. And the only thing we need to do there is add some agricultural growing of some corn or something on the plane, and it'll be perfect.
Well, thank you, Dan, for all the work that you're doing, and we really applaud the efforts of Aecom taking the torch and expanding this mission to beyond just shoes, to really to the skies. So we really are excited to see what the next decade brings in terms of algae remediation, clean water, clean air, and environmental restoration. We appreciate you joining us for the podcast today.
And Ryan and John, it's always a pleasure working with you guys. I've enjoyed the last several years working with you both, and look forward to the future of algae.
To the future of algae.
Cheers to that. Thank you, Dan.
All right, gentlemen, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, or if you have an interesting topic that you'd like us to talk about, leave it in the comments below. If you like content like this, please consider subscribing. We'll see you next time in the Bloom Room.